So in our third round of the Berlin Intercultural Forum on Expat Tax 2012, we want to look at the perspective of self-employed expatriates who will also become employers in Germany. Before we start talking about this one, let's have another view what Russell is doing.
The gallery is named Emerson Gallery Berlin. My name is Russell Redzinski, but I didn't need my name on the window, so we named the gallery after Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a philosopher in the United States in the 19th century. I personally don't consider myself an American. I'm a New Yorker, but I've been in Berlin for quite some time. I found the German bureaucracy not only to be very, very precise, but also to be quite fair. One of the things that I learned very, very quickly is that you have to overcome some of your prejudices and some of your reservations in terms of speaking to these people who are actually very, very open if you have questions. Well, the challenges of starting the enterprise, in my opinion, are much greater here in Germany than in the United States. But once you get over those hurdles, I think all of that organization can actually be a benefit in the long term because you're very well organized and you can turn back to procedures that should be familiar with a little bit of time. We work with freelancers sometimes. We also work with what are called mini jobs. Mini jobs are a very effective program that Germany came up with during the financial crisis to keep the unemployment rate down. And then also we work with people who do internships and normal employees. I used to think that the greatest challenge was the language, but after speaking to several of my German friends and colleagues, I realized that the German language in terms of the bureaucracy is as difficult for Germans as it is for expats.
Russell, you mentioned a very important point, and I'm very grateful for that, the tax language, the tax German, is sometimes as difficult for Germans as it is for expatriates. So if I hadn't had a good aid for that, a good consultant, she is here by the way, if I hadn't had her, I would be lost in that as well. So I'm glad to have my experts here again on that, and now we are focusing a little bit more. So we were arriving from the employed perspective and starting a self-employment, but now the business is growing. We see Russell's gallery, which is, by the way, just down the river, a few hundred meters from here. It's opening up and growing, and now I realize I can't do it myself and I need to hire people. What is the particular challenge when you take this step?
Well, first, if you need to have employment contracts, I think it's the first question for you. I'm obligated to make it in a special form, or I'm free and only they come in and go out and receive their wages. And it's very recommendable to make written contracts. You are obligated, we call it Nachweisgesetz. You have to it can be proved that who you employ, for what periods, for what employment, for what hours a day, what he has to do, what's with vacation and so on. And so it's very recommendable to do it, and you are obligated to prove it. Yes, you can to prove it, and then to hand over it to the employee. So you will have some. Yes, if he disagrees with something or so, you have a written form you can rely on. And then I think you have many obligations, for instance, for wage tax withholding and such things. You have to prove if you have to file self-assessment notices to the offices or to the office who is responsible for that kind of employment. You mentioned you will have mini jobs. That is another authority you will transfer your deductions than if you have normal employees with a wage tax certificate, or if you have freelancers, you have other tasks, for instance, to care for it, that they are not deemed to be self-employed, but they are really freelancers. That will be another topic.
So a lot of work. Are you through with everything already?
You're never through.
You're never through. Comparing it, for example, to the US or New York, if you want, what is the difference there? I mean, it sounds, or my impression would be that it is more complicated getting all these steps through. Also look especially at employment contracts. I mean, if you hire someone, you bind him or her to your company, and it's not only this way around, you always also bind yourself towards your employee. I mean, we have a very high protection of employment rights in Germany. You don't easily get rid of your employees, even if you want to, which has some benefits. This is a very important cornerstone of our German society. But do you find it more complicated than in the US? And what differences did you notice there?
It's certainly more formal and certainly more regulated. Also certainly more written than, for example, in the United States, but that can also be a benefit to you. For example, with the mini jobs, we were able to pull up samples, okay, from the internet, from the financial authorities, and so on. We had then basically a sample that we could work with and then modify according to our special needs and according to the needs of the employee. Mm-hmm. So it's actually not bad that everything's formalized and so on. It gets rid of some confusion and also gets rid of some potential disagreements and conflicts down the line.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Again here, with all that paperwork, what are the things that someone who is not really an expert on that should really watch out for? I could imagine that the higher the obligations are, the higher is the risk to do a mistake and to run into trouble with that. Are there any points that you would recommend to the audience who said, don't ever cross this line, this is an absolutely no-go, for example, with that?
You should run a payroll for each employee, I think, and you can give it out to another office who is specialized on that, because it's a lot of work to find out what is taxable or not taxable, but you can pay tax-free or in cash and benefit or other things. Then all these things with the health insurance and the other insurance premiums you have to be aware of, and then you always have to be compliant, yes, with from a tax point of view and from Social Security point of view, and you are responsible for your employees, and if you are not so sure what you have to do, what you have to file or to deduct or not, please ask a payroll provider.
And isn't it the case that with deadlines they're a little bit more demanding and thorough in making sure you meet the deadlines?
Yes,
I remember my
course,
consultant reminding me, you have to do this now. It's getting too late. Pay your Lohnsteuer, things like that.
You should know the deadlines and to transfer the Lohnsteuer, for instance, at the 10th of the following month of the employment.
What happens if I miss a deadline with health insurance or with that? Is it just a random thing you can do, or what happens when you miss deadlines or so? What can they do?
Well, they can fine you. You get late payment penalties might be assessed, and I don't know what it's like with Social Security, to be honest. If there is a range within that can be assessed, but if you keep filing things late, there will be financial punishments, and the more often you do that, most likely the punishments will get higher.
Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you have yourself well organized and so on, it's always best to tell them ahead of time if you think you're going to miss the deadline, and also get it in writing and have a documentation trail and so on. And then my experience anyway is they'll be a little bit lenient. If you have a good track record and they know they can trust you, then you say, look, I'm going to miss the deadline this time. Can you please waive the fees and the penalties? And usually they'll do that.
If you don't do it again and again, I think that's...
Yeah, it's always best to tell them ahead of time that you're going to be late, which is, of course, a little bit absurd, but I mean, it can happen. Okay.
Agreed. You told us a story yesterday about your first time going through an audit with Finanzamt. I think that is something people are sweating or getting sweat pearls on their head when they hear the word audit and the tax audit is coming. How was that for you?
One of the advantages in this case was that I'm married, because my wife knows what my character is like, and the tax consultant we know also knew that, and both of them said, Russell, it's better if you were not there. They said if you lose your temper with this gentleman, it's not going to be good for either you or the gentleman. So because of my tax situation, we filed jointly, and my wife and the tax consultant spoke for me. And as a matter of fact, at the end of the whole process, the person actually complimented my wife and the tax consultant, not me. And since then, we haven't had any problems. So in this case, because I had people that I could trust, it was a good idea for me not, as a rather nervous, wired person, for me not to personally be there.
Sometimes it's good to delegate things, absolutely.
I run a small company in London, an IT company, and I moved to Germany a couple of years ago, now 2.5 years ago, and have a GmbH here as well. Now the question is, for a certain project we are thinking of getting 2 of the guys from the London office out over here for probably around 4 to 6 months. Do these guys, and they will keep on being paid, they're on payroll over in London, will these guys have to get into the German system, or is it okay to keep them on the UK one? Or I mean, specifically on the case of health insurance, where I've got no idea at all. Does that kind of carry on, or do they need to get into the German system?
As my colleague said, it depends. He's within the EU, and he's covered, I think, by Social Security system of the UK, and he can apply to be covered, to stay, to be covered in the UK system. Then you if you have the right certificate for that, you have not to pay into the German Social Security system. And for instance, conditions for that he is coming to Germany only for a limited time, limited period. He is connected with his employer in the UK, and the costs are not recharged to the German GmbH. If they are recharged, you can apply for an exemption, and so are many possibilities to stay in a home country in a social security system. It makes no sense to collect 6 months in Germany for the pension or so, yes. And so we have this regulation within the EU you can use. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I hope you enjoyed this evening a little bit. We try to combine a topic that is often perceived as dry and complicated, like taxes, with a little intercultural spin and get talking on that. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for coming to the Berlin Intercultural Forum, and I look forward talking to you later on downstairs, or even here, or somewhere else in the future. Thank you and goodbye.